with the Food Safety Inspection Service, I will try to let everyone know what our role is in traceability and then where our role ends and the next agency picks up. So in our Code of Federal Regulations in 310, it talks about what we're required to do during postmortem inspection, and it also lays out the regulations that the establishments need to follow. And this regulation that's listed here requires that all establishments collect any identification that is on the animal at the time that it is presented for harvesting. And the animals, usually the identification is placed into a plastic bag, and that plastic bag is affixed to the carcass, and it's required that that identification be presented at the time the viscera is presented for inspection. So usually what happens in the flow of the carcass is that at the time the viscera is presented for inspection, that carcass is right there with the viscera, so you're able to relate that original identification that's on the carcass with that viscera. And it's at the viscera inspection station because that's most of the time where we find pathology that gives an indication that we need to do a traceback. When the cattle are received by the establishment, they come in and they are unloaded in the holding pens, and each one of those holding pens has a card associated with it that the establishments create, and they're called pen cards. And that pen card contains the information of where those animals came from, whether it's a livestock place, whether it's a dairy, whether it's a private owner, whether it's a sale barn, wherever it came from, it comes. And so sometimes it'll say something like Seguin Livestock Auction or Joe's Dairy, and that's the name that is associated with all the cattle in that lot from that truckload. And the establishment is required to present that information with the name of where those cattle came from at the time of antemortem inspection. And so that is the first point where the FSIS implant personnel verify that there's some type of name associated with those animals. Can we go back? Okay, and just the VS 454, that is a form that the establishment is required to maintain, and on that form it documents any of the permanent identification numbers, such as the back tag numbers, the ear tag numbers. If there's a herd bangle tag number, they will document that information on the form, and that form also contains the owner's name, which most of the time is the name of a livestock exchange company or a dairy. Okay. And so when we talk about the flow of how the animals come through, there's the dirty area and the clean area. And the dirty area is essentially where the animal's stunned, it's bled, and then it's prepared for dehiding. And during the process of dehiding, of preparation, that's when the identification is collected on the different parts of the animal. So the back tag is collected, the ear tag is collected, if the establishment will allow their employees to cut the ear tag, which we'll talk about that later. And so it's at that point, just before the carcass enters the clean area, that the identification bag is affixed to the carcass and should flow with the carcass throughout the entire process until the final postmortem inspection. And our inspectors are stationed at the head stations, the viscera stations, and the final rails. So they're not always in an area where they can verify that the original identification is maintained with the carcass at all times, because the establishment is only required to present the original identification at the time of the viscera inspection. So there are times when that identification falls off the carcass, and we can talk about that later. Okay. So some of the issues are the safety. I mentioned the metal ear tag. Some establishments do not want their employees using a knife to remove the metal ear tag. They feel like it's a safety risk. So a lot of times a metal ear tag could be left, and that might be the only source of original identification if the animal did not come with a back tag, or if the back tag fell off, that we're losing that metal ear tag, so we're losing our traceability. Also, some of these establishments have it set up so that they have one or two individuals, one working on a low rail, one working on a high rail, to retrieve that original identification off the animal. And sometimes in their confined space, they're not able to reach for the back tag, or they're not able to get to it and within the time of the line speed. So sometimes the identification, like the back tags, are lost with the hide. Sometimes it falls off either on the live animal or on the carcass. Throughout the process, the back tag can be lost. The plastic bag can become unhooked if they are using metal hooks to hold the plastic bag onto the carcass. Sometimes those metal hooks through the process get stuck on something and they pull the bag off, the identification bag off. And supervisors, employees, inspectors don't always recognize that in time to associate it back to the carcass that it came from. And then finally, there's a chance of human error that when they're typing in the information for the identification into their RFID system, if plants are using that and putting a tag into the carcass, or if they are documenting information on the 454, there is a chance that numbers could be mixed up, or the sequencing there could be an error in the sequencing. And in my experience, I have noticed a few times when I went back to trace information that the data that they had in their computer associated with one animal with a house tag number was not correlating with the back tag number that was actually hanging on the carcass. So I have seen instances where the sequencing has been off. The impact of some new processes, probably the main one is the cow wash, and that's where there's concern that the back tags are being lost in the cow wash. But also, not just during antemortem procedures, but also during postmortem procedures where they go through a series of wash cabinets. If the identification bag is not affixed to the carcass in a way that it will remain secure, I have seen identification being lost in those spray cabinets. Another question that came up was the impact of brucellosis testing and the decreased surveillance for brucellosis. And there, as I'm sure you all know, there are cooperative agreements between the Animal Health Commissions and APHIS for doing first point brucellosis testing. And so the figures that I was quoted was that the cell barns are receiving about $2 per eligible head to do the brucellosis testing, and that funding is coming from the Animal Health Commissions. Probably some of you will have a better idea of how that works. And then at slaughter, the first point testing, those establishments that choose to do that will receive 25 cents a head up to the first 5,000 head in a month, and then after that, 20 cents a head. And due to the reduced first point testing, there is a concern that there's decreased traceability because those records aren't being maintained. Those metal air tags that are affixed to the animal at the time of the calf foot vaccination, there was in Texas, I know, had a generic database with all that information, and probably a lot of other states did also. And so when the metal ear tags are not being applied, there's a concern that records aren't being maintained as completely or as frequently as they were before, whenever brucellosis testing was so prevalent and required. We can move on. So I've heard the term the first point identifying, where sale barns and veterinarians are going through the motions as they would if they were going to actually vaccinate for brucellosis. They're affixing the ear tag, they're recording the documentation and maintaining the records. They're just not actually vaccinating the animal. So we still do have records being made, which is a good thing. There was questions about the average traceback time. From the time that a carcass is found to show signs, or an animal is found to show signs that could warrant a residue violation, those tissues are collected and sent the same day that the animal was recognized to be a suspect. And it takes approximately 3 days for the confirmation to be completed. Once the laboratories confirm that there is a violative residue, then that carcass and parts are condemned, and that information is received by OPPD, our Office of Program and Policy Development, and they have the information that we gave to them. And oftentimes, because we just have the name of a livestock exchange company or of an auction or of a dairy, that's what we provide whenever we have to provide our traceback information, because that's what the establishment provides to us. So the establishment not necessarily have the name and owner of the person that sold the animal at the sale barn. They have the name of the sale barn where that came from, or of the dairy where that animal came from, and that's what they provide to us. So that's what we provide as our traceback information. So that is uploaded onto the residue violation information system and done by OPPD. And so in that system, we provide the information, and so that is where the FSIS authority and responsibility ends. When we give the information to OPPD, they put that on the RVIS system, and then it's the responsibility of the FDA to take over. Now, the number of untraced animals that's all kept track of by the FDA. What the numbers that I have is in 2008, approximately 7% of the violations that were found were not able to be traced back to the producer or dairy from where that animal came from. In 2009 and 2010, it's been about 5.5%. So that will give you an idea of the number of untraced animals. Okay. Successful traces, if we have accurate records where we can determine the name of the original owner and we have official permanent identification, that will lead in the most successful traces. When an establishment can provide us with a name and an address right away, then the investigation can go right to that person that owned the animal or that producer. Whenever the FDA has to go and investigate further on the information that we were able to provide, that's when it results in a longer time for the original producer or for the person that is responsible for the drug violation to be recognized, located, and to be notified of their violation. So our goals when it comes to traceability and residue protection is that we want to be able to provide the FDA with accurate and reliable information about the animal's owner. And our main goal for doing that is that we want to eliminate repeat violators of drug residues. And also for traceability, we need to be able to assist with controlling zoonotic diseases such as brucellosis, tuberculosis, because our ultimate goal is to protect the public health. So that is just a brief overview of FSIS's responsibility when it comes to traceability.